Welcome to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we equipped you to more effectively lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. Each week, we help you sharpen your leadership acumen by cracking open the playbooks of dynamic leaders who are doing big things in their professional endeavors. And now your host, leadership tactics and organizational development expert, Karen Farrell Rhodes.
Hello, superstars. Welcome back to another episode of the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast. I am just truly pleased to have on today's show a fantastic guest who actually is a fellow contributor, just as I am, to Forbes.com via the Forbes Coaches Council, as well as she's good friends. Have similar networks, and I was just so thrilled that she agreed to come aboard today. Her name is Jessica Hartung, and she is an entrepreneur, an executive mentor, and the author of the book, The Conscious Professional, Transform Your Life at Work. And when I knew about her book and learned more in-depthly about her professional background and the passion she has about empowering people to be their best selves in a very conscious and meaningful way, I had to snag her and get her on the podcast because I know we can all learn something from her. So welcome to the show, Jessica.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen. I'm really thrilled to be here and so delighted about our common perspectives and background. It just feels like we've been looking at things and observing them for many years and come to some similar conclusions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I can't wait to dive into them as well. But before we do so, one of the things we always love to learn is just a little bit about our guests in their lives outside of work. So for just as much as you feel comfortable, can you give us a sneak peek into your life and or family outside of work?
Oh, sure. Well, I'm in Boulder, Colorado, and one of my favorite things to do is get out in the morning. I have a little corgi as my first ever dog I got in my 50s, and I'd never had a pet like that before. And so we've been walking in the mornings in the sunrise, and I say that is just really sets me up for a day. And as we were walking, we've been doing this for a couple of years, I started to notice the landscapes. They look so beautiful. And I was very surprised because inside my internal voice said, you need to weave that. And I thought, I don't know how to weave. So I learned. I now weave. And I weave landscapes and other tapestry weaving. And so it was a wonderful way to use the creativity, the beauty of this location and my connection with getting out in the morning and to have something that's lasting and something that's creative. And it really fills my bucket.
Oh, that is wonderful. Well, first of all, welcome to the pet parent family. They truly make a difference in our lives. And I'm a little jealous of you being in Boulder because it is absolutely gorgeous. Excuse me, I've visited there many times, but I understand why you fell in love with walking and enjoying the landscape. So, and then the other thing I was going to tease you about is, I'm based here in Atlanta. And so if you say the word snow or ice, we all freeze. But we just, had a small dusting I few days ago and survived, thank goodness.
Good.
Yes, but it's gorgeous. So,
and I think that's sitting inside the house, looking out at the freezing cold when as those days, you don't feel like you want to go out in it. But I got into the habit of just putting on the shoes, putting on the coat, getting the dog, going out. And any weather is beautiful when you're out in it and enjoying it.
It's usually just the first maybe coldness that hits when you first step out.
Yes.
But like you said, once you get going and you're out there, your body adapts and then you just appreciate the surroundings. So, well, thank you so much for sharing that.
I will also mention that I'm 35 years married.
Oh, congratulations.
I have a wonderful husband, astrophysicist. And one of the things that's interesting, in terms of the personal and professional, I've always felt that how we grow professionally impacts our personal lives and how we grow personally impacts our, the quality of our leadership. I guess I feel that watching my husband go through a career change and then getting his PhD at 52,
Wow.
then he went and has since gone on to his science career. It was really important because Transform Your Life at Work is the promise of that book. And the promise of the book, The Conscious Professional, is really about, can you shape your work life to suit you and be productive and successful? And I watched my husband do it. And, of course, I was playing a small role as well as a coach on the side.
Sure, of course. And he was lucky to have such a wonderful and beautiful inside coach to help him as well.
Yeah.
Well, really would love for us to kind of talk a little bit about your journey and, speaking of career and pivoting and learning from all of your experiences. Would you mind sharing with us at a high level of your professional career, whether you had any corporate experience, and then what was your entrepreneurial journey like?
Well, it's so interesting. Thank you for asking that question. And I'll try and use a long journey, but short words. I was at the University of Michigan and I was studying to be a teacher. I thought I would be a secondary school teacher. And I had a conflict with my professor. And I just really was trying to explain to him, you're not doing what you're saying we should do. You're not doing in your classroom what you're saying we should do in our classrooms. He did not appreciate that and asked me not to come back to class.
Oh,
And
man.
so I got a job at a startup. So I was getting a job at a startup because I needed something that I could ride my bike to. And what happened is that it changed my career right then because as I was at this startup, still in college, and my manager left, and then we started managing ourselves in the telemarketing department. And I realized nobody knows how to do this better than us. And so we kind of inside of a little pocket of not empowered people just did what we needed to do and managed ourselves. And that role that was just a part-time job in my college career kind of launched things for me because I realized that if you want to learn how to do something, you can. And that often the people in the organization around don't know. So you are empowered to learn your job, even if those who are in charge of you can't teach you. And that was a big insight. That was a very entrepreneurial insight is, actually I can be in charge of myself and my learning. And that experience, I ended up starting consulting firms after that. I worked for Ford Motor Credit, a big company. I thought, all
Yeah.
right, I want to get and see what it's like and I sampled all the different types of organizations. So I sampled startups, nonprofits, corporations, and then building my own. And no time in there did I feel confident that I knew how to build a business, but I also began to have confidence in the process of learning. Like I might not know how to do it, but I can figure it out along the way. And so
Right.
having confidence in the learning, it almost allowed me to go places that a person who's not confident in themselves is not going to go. But because
Right.
I was confident in the learning, I could. So after I left Ford Motor, I got a job for a small healthcare information company. And I worked and it was mid-sized. I worked there for a while and my husband ended up getting transferred to Boulder. And so I said, I'm sorry, I have to leave. I'm going to be moving to Boulder. And they said, how about if you stay working for us? And that was in 1995.
For remote
So
work
I was
was.
a telecommuter and a pioneer in the remote working experience. And it really shaped, I was getting my master's degree at the time. It really shaped my career in realizing that what we do can be done digitally. So much of our work. And that was very formative. It was after that business that I started Integrated Work, which is a leadership development firm still going on, new ownership and leadership. I transferred it in 2020. But from
Congratulations.
Thank you. From 1998 to 2020, I was growing a leadership development firm that served nonprofit executives, and we did a lot of peer-to-peer group development. And so that was really my raising. I raised myself up with these other, we all learned how to be CEOs together,
Yes.
and it was very gratifying. And then that process of transitioning a business, going through the succession planning, and actually exiting a business. And I have a publishing business I started in 2012. And so I continue to use the publishing business for my work now. And the executive mentorship is through Treelight as the company. And so my career has been primarily entrepreneurial.
It sounds
And
yeah.
I'm as surprised as you.
But you might be surprised. Maybe you didn't know that when you were that young college kid when the professor said, "Don't come back," and you were just trying to find your next best opportunity. You may not have known it back then, but there, was a path and it was
Yes.
meaningful. And it sounds like there were transitions along the way that helped direct your step. And there was a lot of learning along the way as well. What I'm also fascinated about is that your concept of learning labs. And so I would love for you to share with our listeners a little bit more about your thoughts and thought leadership on that and how valuable they are. And then I'd love to delve into your passion and around writing your book and maybe a tidbit or two there. So let's first start with the learning labs.
Yeah. So, what I realized is that as an owner of a business who had people to train and myself to train, is that actually we can use the conditions of work to create a learning laboratory for our leadership. It's not hard to do, it requires three things, and it's awareness, willingness, and skill. And when people are aware of what they'd like to learn, what is it that they want to do with their time and their influence, and what skills do they need in order to do that? And so then we start to look in the environment around them as to where could they build those skills. Are there task forces? Are there committees? Are there volunteer opportunities? Are there opportunities within your own workspace, in talking with your staff or your team? So looking at how to build for each person a customized, it's not so much an individual development plan, but actually a way in which they get to practice their leadership. What I find is that in the awareness area, oftentimes folks are trying to teach those who are not yet aware that they need to learn that. And of course, it doesn't go very far.
No, not at all.
Right. And then we also know that when folks are willing, it might not have been the first item on our curriculum, but if the willingness is there, if you start there, then things can flow from there. And that the actual skill building happens in practice. It happens with the learning by doing. So I recently talked to a client, and we were setting her up for, assessments and other things. And she's like, this is like turning my work into a learning laboratory. And I was like, well, thank you. That's exactly what we had in mind. Yeah. So
Yeah,
I think it lifts retention, it lifts employee engagement, it lifts and reduces burnout, because when folks are learning and have their own intersected with what it is that their content of their learning, it really activates their engagement, because it's more than just about the job, it's about what they want to learn in their life.
that's right. And I think that's why you and I connected so much when we spoke earlier, because you all emphasize a lot of that. I always do as well, is that whole active learning by doing. And then my research and work takes it one step further, is how do you put it all together when you're back on the job? And so that's what we were, trying to research leadership execution, because you take all of these great learning experiences that you have, whether they be formalized or informal or on the job, but at some point you got to pull them all together and to operate as, your best self as you integrate them into your roles. And so that's
Yes.
try
And
to help people
that
do.
integration is the part that I spend the most time working with folks on, is
And it's
after they've
hard,
read
right?
something, and we're talking about, let's take how to deal with mistakes. So they've read the thing on here's some different approaches. Now they're dealing with their own mistake. But the applying of that is where the coaching and support comes in. And that
Right.
can come from peers. It doesn't require it to be
Correct.
necessarily a leadership development professional, but when peers learn how to support one another as thinking partners, they can help with some of that implementation, because we just get stuck in our own limits. But when we have the access to those other brains around us, it can really support being able to see the bigger picture.
That's right. Iron sharpens iron. So absolutely. Absolutely. So, share a little bit more with us about how you came up with the passion and the idea to write your book, and maybe a few nuggets that you might be able to share with our listeners as takeaways for today.
Sure. Well, the first thing I published was an article in Conscious Company magazine, and it was called "What to Do If Your Coworkers Were Raised by Wolves."
Ah, that is so cool.
So the idea of raised by wolves came out because so many of us have had difficult work experiences, right? And we leave that work experience behind. Isn't that lovely? Except that we bring with us a lot of the behaviors because we don't know different. We've been raised by wolves in the sense that we haven't seen what it's like to live in a more conscious company. So that then when a person who's leaving a wolf den and is dropped in a conscious company is both hard for them to get their bearings. How are we? Whoa, this culture is so different. And
Yeah.
it's also hard for coworkers to know how to support that person. And so that's what I wrote because this is what I was hearing folks were having trouble with. So what I've done is decided that my role, if you will, is to help the difference makers and give them the boost and the support and some of the consolidated knowledge that they need. And so the idea of starting to publish, and then I thought, there's only so many people I can work with directly. If I can, give this information to a broader audience, and it kind of is an on ramp. And that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted folks to have an on ramp to conscious professional development for themselves. Their
Mm.
manager may or may not be in on this, right? But they don't have to wait. And especially at the upper levels, when I look at some of the managers and leaders, they are not receiving mentorship, management, leadership in the way that they are wanting to be able to deliver it. So they have to grow it themselves.
That's right.
And that process of giving guidance so that folks can grow what they need to. It's kind of like instead of giving the fish, teaching folks how to extract the learning and the benefit from their job. And I call that the third paycheck. So the first paycheck being our financial compensation, benefits, et cetera. The second paycheck, the emotional reward, that sense of satisfaction. But the third paycheck is the skills and the
Yeah.
new capacities that we have built from our experience. And we take that with us forever. And I want everybody to get their third paycheck.
I want everybody to get their third paycheck too. And I wish I had something like that back when I first started, my career. And I'm not sure exactly where your book is targeting, but I think it could be of such benefit, especially to those that are coming out of college and earlier in career, because companies are making some tough choices about where to invest in talent development. And it's widely reported it's not all the needs
Yeah.
that the general workforce population has. And what a kickstart, a way to change your thinking around you
Yes.
don't have to wait on others. There are things you can do to start upskilling yourself and preparing yourself in the future for the future.
Yeah. And
I
I
love
wrote
that.
it very practical. Every chapter has examples of real life work situations based on my clients' experiences and some of my own experiences. But what's important to me is to democratize leadership development. This is something that each individual can own for themselves.
Yeah.
And so giving people a book that mentors them how to, that's really what I wanted because I believe that, our whole society is undergoing changes right
Yeah.
now. We're trying to figure out how to live together and work together as human beings on this planet.
That's right.
And the first place where we start to explore that is in our workplaces, right? And so
That's
that's
right.
why I'm a fan of conscious professionalism, the greater self awareness, more personal, actual authenticity in the workplace. And these are subtle and, emerging aspects of leadership. But I
Absolutely.
think there's no reason why we can't all be working on it at the same time.
I agree. I totally agree. And I know there's a kind of a holistic and an intentional approach to doing this, but Jessica, can you give our listeners just one piece of advice of what could they do or an example of where they could start just so they can kind of ground it in their minds and rush out and get your book to learn more.
All right. Well, I've got two real important entry points. So
Okay.
when folks say to me, well, if I want to be a conscious professional, what's the first thing I would do? And there's certainly many different answers to that. But one thing that you can start with in any role is you can start to notice what's working and comment on it. And so when we're deliberate, we think about someone who's conscious and deliberate in their intent. They're focused on doing something intentionally because they think it's going to work well. It's their strategy to make it effective. But before that, before we have a sense of we want to intend to do this, we need to even notice what is worth doing. So that first bit of noticing what's working and getting that praise or appreciation or acknowledgement of that out there, that's one thing that anyone can do in any role. And it really up levels the environment. And the
I love
second
that.
thing is I talk a lot of folks about burnout.
Yeah.
And this has been a very intense time for many folks. And we're almost everybody's sort of flirting with the edge of burnout,
Yes.
in the amount of activities that we take on. So when we look at burnout, and I've written a number of articles on that, the various stages of it, et cetera, but let me just give you one piece,
Sure.
which is that in burnout, we are generally looking to plug the holes, see where folks are depleting their energy, and stop that from happening. I'd like to offer another alternative.
Hmm.
Yes, we do want to, stop the depletion of the energy,
Right.
but unless we build some energy, we're still not really going to overcome that burnout. What we're looking for is how do we get fired up again, right?
Right.
And
Right.
so the thing I would recommend, the one tip for those who are dealing with burnout, flirting with burnout, watching others who are flirting with burnout, is that being able to notice what gives you energy. This is where awareness is much more of an asset than most people realize. Awareness sounds so passive. But
Yeah.
if you're aware of where you get energy, what gives you more, then as you delete some of the things that deplete you, if you have this ongoing energy source, and so for some people, it's a type of work. There was a study done in Drive that physicians were able to select whether it's research, client contact, instruction, what was the aspect of their job they enjoyed the most. And they were able to do that for 20%, only 20% of the time, the
Wow.
aspect they enjoyed the most. It reduced burnout by half
Amazing.
because the energy that is created from the positive experience lets the other energy depleters be less of a problem. You see what
Right.
I mean?
And it provides more room for those energy boosters
Yes.
to take space, right, in your mental
Right.
well-being. I love that.
And then
Wow.
it starts to have a cascade effect, where we feel a little bit better and we get a little more energized. And so that burnout kind of is the seeds of the firing up, is happening right
Absolutely.
from there. Yeah.
So
So
can I
thanks for asking that.
add to that? Yes, and so these are two. I was busy writing them down on my notebook, so I didn't forget them. Those are two great examples, but it's specifically on burnout. I would give our listeners a bit of coaching that you have to articulate and be intentional with your manager and coworkers around that. Call out what gives you energy
Yes.
and what might be your quicksand, because it's amazing how people will adapt to you and say, hey, Karen loves
Yes.
chit-chatting with people or entertaining or, going to business meetings. Why doesn't she take the lead on this interaction with this client while John over here really likes spreadsheets and putting data together, and he can take the lead on, doing whatever, the
Yeah.
back end work. But if you call it out and make people aware of it, it's amazing how they will try to help support you.
Yes.
And that's part of being that conscious professional.
It is. And that collective learning is
Yeah.
something that I'm a proponent of. I guess I would call myself an advocate for workplace learning, in that collective way. And so when you're looking at what gives you energy and what gives someone else, and, helping us to learn together
Yeah.
how we maximize what we can do.
Yeah.
And that process of learning together or collective learning, I think not everybody knows how to do that.
And it's
That's
something you don't have to wait for your boss to do. You can do
right.
it. Start it,
But
right?
but not everyone knows how to be a participant in
That's
collective
true.
learning. They kind of need some support so that you have that approach in your business as a accepted rather than sometimes people look at learning as losing.
Yeah.
When I'm learning something about you or we're learning something together, that means that we're not at our best. I feel, that if we're ever going to get closer to our best, we're going to be doing a lot of learning, and if we could do it together, then it's exponentially more powerful.
I agree. I have another consultant who's a friend who has a whole series on what he calls contributorship. And what he does is he helps teams and organizations understand how to best interact and learn and support each other. And what does that truly look like to build high performing teams? And it's just amazing some of the work and studies that have been done about that. And that kind of really backs up some of the points that you just made
Yes, it's
as
all
well.
connected. That's one of the things I've been very satisfied about. We keep up on the industry, and I read Harvard Business Review, and I was just reading that there were three different styles of organizational learning leading, the leading of the organizational learning. And one is kind of a custodian of the existing, competency models. And the next one is more of a challenger and creating new opportunities. And the third type was a connector, and the connector created opportunities for people to learn from each other as a
Right.
part of an institutional curriculum, and not just sitting in front of a PowerPoint, but actual dialogue. And that's where I focus. People need the skill of being able to have dialogue in a group where we're talking about personal, professional development things. It's a capacity, and we're building it.
That's right. Absolutely right. Well, Jessica, I could talk to you for literally 5 hours, much to probably the chagrin of our listeners. But we cannot let you leave out of here without asking you our signature question. As you know, we've done quite a bit of work on the concept of leadership execution and best practices around that. And you were so kind to share that leading with strategic decision making really resonated with you. And
Yes.
for my new listeners, just so you know, it is what it sounds like. It's strategic decision making is all about making good decisions yourself or helping to lead a great decision making process with your colleagues or people you're working in order to achieve your top strategic goals and priorities. So, curious minds want to know, Jessica, why did strategic decision making really resonate with you?
Well, there was a statistic that I read a number of years ago from the Center of Creative Leadership, and it said less than 10% of executives have strategic thinking skills. I was
That's the sad
shocked and
state of
appalled.
affairs.
I was shocked and appalled.
Me too.
And, I also really appreciate that there's a big difference between a tactical decision maker and a strategic decision maker. And we're all
Correct.
making all of those decisions daily, but not being aware of when we're moving into a strategic zone or we need to move into a strategic zone is so important to me because I think it gives us that executive view when we look across and from any position, when I was an ice cream scooper back in high school, we're scooping the ice cream on a hot summer night. And I realized that some of the ice cream coolers are lower and the kids can see in them. But the flavors that the kids like are in the higher coolers and the parents have to lift them up and it's taken forever. And so what we did was redesign where the ice cream goes based on the customer flow, and so
Nice.
that's not a worker bee perspective, right? Yet my role was scooping ice cream. But what I wanted to share is that everyone in any role can use strategic thinking and ultimately strategic decision making to advance the success of the whole.
Exactly. I love that. What a great example. I might have to shamelessly steal that, plagiarize that if I can from you when we teach and talk about it. That was a great example.
Good.
All right. Well, Jessica, we truly appreciate the gift of your time and coming on the show today. We're going to have a ton of information about you, obviously, in the show notes, your bio, links to where to find you and your company and the great work you're doing. But we'd love to give you a little bit of airtime to do the same. So can you please share where folks can find you if they want to catch up and learn more?
Yes, I think the best place is jessicahartung.com. I've got good material out there so you can get to know me. But I would also say LinkedIn is a great place. I post there, and I also in the Forbes Coaches Council. Usually we post there on LinkedIn. So I love to connect with folks on LinkedIn. I'm happy to do that. And the professional development type of tips and material that I put out, I always appreciate interaction and questions and even challenging questions. I love it when folks say, I don't understand when you said this or this, which is it? And, those kind of questions are great. So I love the dialogue that's available on LinkedIn and would be delighted to have you show up on jessicahartung.com. We're doing a new 7-day Transform Your Life. It's called a Power Shift Challenge. And so it'll be 7 days of on the job development.
That's amazing. Well, listeners, if you don't go out and befriend Jessica on LinkedIn, you're really losing out. I mean, she's a person that is very giving, would love to interact with you, has invited you to do so. So definitely take advantage. Well, thank you again, Jessica, for coming on the show today. And we really and truly appreciate you.
Thank you. And back at you. I love what you're doing and grace with which you do it.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot. And thank you too, listeners, for the gift of your time today. We always know that there are literally millions of other podcasts you could be listening to out there, and we do not take your patronage lightly. All that we ask is that you please subscribe to the show and share it with just one friend, because by doing so, we can all better lead at the top of our games. Thanks so much, and see you next week.
Thank you.
And that's our show for today. Thank you for listening to the Lead at the Top of Your Game podcast, where we help you lead your seat at any employer, business, or industry in which you choose to play. You can check out the show notes, additional episodes, bonus resources, and also submit guest recommendations on our website at leadyourgamepodcast.com. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn by searching for the name Karen Rhodes, with Karen being spelled Karan. And if you like the show, the greatest gift you can give would be to subscribe and leave a rating on your podcast platform of choice. This podcast has been a production of Shockingly Different Leadership, a global consultancy which helps organizations execute their people, talent development, and organizational effectiveness initiatives on an on-demand project or contract basis. Huge thanks to our production and editing team for a job well done. Goodbye for now.